Welcome to the Observe Day podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Today on the Observe Day podcast, as we mark International Day of Education, we're sitting with someone whose life story makes the idea of education feel deeply personal, powerful, and urgent. Our guest is Ed Hajim, author of On the Road Less Traveled, An Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom. Ed's life began in instability. At the age of 3, he was kidnapped by his father, separated from his mother, and pushed into a childhood marked by foster homes, orphanages, and survival. By any statistic, his story should have ended early. Instead, it became extraordinary. Eden went on to become a seasoned Wall Street executive with over 5 decades of experience, led major financial institutions, chaired boards, and later gave back at an unprecedented scale, most notably a 30 million gift to education, the largest in the University of Rochester's history. Today's conversation isn't just about success, it's about education as freedom, mentorship as survivor, and how learning, formal and informal, can rewrite a life's trajectory. Ed, welcome to the Observe the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, on International Day of Education, many people talk about schools and systems. You've lived the human side of this conversation. What does education truly mean to you beyond classrooms and degrees and all those doctorates and all those things?
Education is, I had to be quote something very simple, but education truly is the solution to everything. Now, education must change over time. When our grandfathers went to school, they learned a trade or a guild, and they spent their life basically in education or spent their life in that particular trade. You became a carpenter, a plumber, or an engineer. Today, education must, take in all kinds of things. Now, education gives you a number of things. First of all, it does give you skills and techniques, but more importantly, it lets you test yourself in various arenas. I wanted to be an engineer, but in my middle of my college career, I decided I'd be a physicist. So I took advanced physics for a semester and found out that wasn't for me. You get a chance to try things out and to fail. And I believe, and one of my crusades right now is to add a whole dimension to college education, where students would spend time on themselves. Who are they? Where do they want to go? How do they expect to get there? And what are the future trends that you want to get the wind at your back? And what are the themes in history? What are the waves and so forth? And it's really the way to be successful is to find something you're really interested in, where you have a passion for, but it turns out to be something in your lifetime that does extremely well. A simple example in my life, what I took over as the managing partner of an investment bank in 1983, a very small one. Question was ever going to survive. And we grew it 20 times over a 20-year period. And although that sounds great, the stock market was up 10 times during that period. So the wind is at my back. I found something I love. I was able to build it, but I had the wind at my back. So education, by the way, education in many different parts, in many respects. I believe young people today will have to be educated. It'll be a lifelong process. As I said, grandfather went to school, learned one thing, and spent his life doing it. Even my father could have after graduating college, could have gone to Exxon or Kodak and spent almost his whole life there. Today, that's not the case. Change is happening so rapidly. Things are changing where industries will come and go many times in these young people's lives, and they have to be ready to change, be ready to be educated. But education gives you friends, it gives you testing experiences, gives you techniques, gives you skills. It actually helps you find out who you are and where you want to go. That's a lot of conversation, but it's a very important topic. It's my second most important message to people. The first one is, because of my life, anything is possible. Second one is, education is the solution to everything.
You grew up moving between 15 to 20 different places, often without stability or guidance. In those early years, what were you learning about life, even before formal education entered the picture?
Well, life teaches you as well as education. First of all, moving from 15 to 20 different places, I became very adaptable. As you know, as a child, you go from one school to the other, or one schoolyard to the other. You learn how to adapt pretty quickly. And I was a runt, actually. I didn't reach 5 feet until I was almost 15 years old. So as a youngster, I weighed, I was 4'6" and I weighed 80 pounds or 66 pounds actually when I was 10 years old. So when you went to a schoolyard, you could be picked on. So you quickly found out how to maneuver yourself as a learning experience, making to survive. In addition, I did luckily go to Catholic schools when I was between ages 5 and 10. And the nuns in those days were very good instructors in a lot of areas. First of all, you really got a good education. You did your homework or else.
Yeah.
But they also gave you a foundation. They gave me a foundation. They made it very clear if you did the right things, you ended up in the right places. If you did the wrong things, you ended up in the other place. And the other place was also described as something that was not very pleasant. So there was discipline there as well. Things like reading, writing, and arithmetic, you learned. I mean, in the fourth grade, I knew most of my multiplication tables because every morning you stood up and you gave the nun your multiplication tables. Or in case you handed in an essay or you wrote something that night, there was no question. So I got a good education as a child, even though I went to 5 different schools. That, of course, gave me adaptability. It also gave me resilience. It gave me some perseverance. And after getting through a few of those things as a youngster, I actually gained a confidence that people who have an easy life don't have. As I give lectures to young people like me, and I say to them, "You're lucky." And they say, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because you have developed skills that your peers in good situations don't have."
Yeah. Huh.
Now, it's hard to understand that. And of course, in third world countries and in countries where there's great poverty, it's not so simple. In America, we're very lucky. We got a chance to, we're one of the few countries in the world where someone like me can really do very well. Other countries are a little more difficult. So I'm speaking from an American point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a very good way to look at the experience and see things differently compared to, oh, my childhood wasn't very stable, and like, oh yeah, that gave me the skill to adapt easily because you moved a lot. One of the things you said.
Your disadvantages became advantages. You
Yeah,
see?
yeah, the disadvantage became advantage. You said that not having control early in life, right? You couldn't control the school you went to, you couldn't control so many things because you were always moving. And those decisions they were not up to you, they were up to your parents and your guardians at that time. Um, Not having the control early in life gave you a strong drive to seek freedom. I'm curious, how did education become a tool that helped you reclaim that freedom?
Well, but again, same situation. Disadvantages become advantages,
Okay.
and what you don't have, you want. And I didn't have freedom. My life was controlled by other people. So my great demand to myself, I really I wanted to be financially secure, and I wanted freedom. And that drove me in a direction of being an entrepreneur, because an entrepreneur, you have more freedom to do what you want to do. And I didn't realize it early on in life that that's one of my drives was the fact I wanted that freedom to make my own decisions. And so I kept moving to organizations where I would have be more control. And I started out working for very large companies, but very quickly I started to move towards small companies where I would be, more in control of my own fate. But that was basically out of having no control whatsoever. Most people have no control either. You are a combination of your genes and your environment, your parents, the local town. But I had no control whatsoever. I mean, I woke up one morning and they said, "Okay, put all your clothes in a plastic bag. We're moving you to another foster home." So
Yeah,
I put the bag over my shoulder and off we went. But so I had no control. And obviously, that was part of my raison d'etre for my entire life of seeking freedom. And I still seek freedom. I mean, as an old timer, I still want to do things where I have control of what I'm doing rather than being
yeah.
part of a large group, which again ends up being I'm not a good committee member. I'm a good committee chairman.
Wow. I always remember that statement. I'm not a good, I'm not a good
No,
community.
I've been the chairman of, I mean, I'm president and chairman of almost everything that I've been involved with because I really wanted to run the show and have my
Yeah,
own decisions. And early in my life, I did work for people. I had difficulty with that. I was a partner of Lehman Brothers, and the boss and I didn't get along at all. And he was a bad guy, so I can say maybe it wasn't my fault, but I still didn't get along with him. He told me to do things which I just wouldn't do, even though he's my boss.
yeah.
And he finally pushed me out. It was okay.
I'm curious. What was the role of mentors in your own education?
I recommend strongly to people is constantly have mentors. Now, I didn't realize early on that I had mentors because was so fiercely independent. When I was in high school, we had a wonderful fellow at the orphanage who tried to mentor me, and I pushed it off because I was strong and I
Yeah.
didn't want to have mentors are very important. I recommend to everybody, no matter what you're doing, find out somebody who's been there, done that. Someone who's gone on that road before you, and ask them, how to do it, or ask her how to do it. Ask them, what's going to go on in this particular arena. I had a mentor, and this orphanage. This fellow was terrific. When I went to college, freshman mechanical drawing professor, which I came close to failing, became a total mentor for 4 years at college. In the Navy, I had a couple of commanding officers when I was a naval officer who were mentors, very, very unbelievable communicators of discipline, following the rules, doing certain kinds of things. It changed my life. And I went to Harvard Business School. I had a couple of professors that were mentors to me. And then even when I became a very successful CEO of an investment bank, I found a mentor. His name was Wally. He was 10 years older than I was, and he had done everything on Wall Street that I'd ever done. So whenever I came to a point in the road where I was not sure, I'd give old Wally a call and say, Wally, what do you think? Now, two things happen when you do that. One, Wally can help you. But on the other hand, when you go to Wally and ask those questions, you yourself have framed the problem. And maybe it's the case by talking to him, you can actually almost solve the problem yourself. But it's good to have a mentor who can, and each mentor obviously has different characteristics. And one of the problems with mentors is they're back there. My Wally did what I did 10 years ago. So it may not be the same today.
Yeah.
But he'll give a good advice. And then a mentor can say, I don't know, it's your call. But yeah, I think mentors are very important. And I have mentored many young people in my time, trying to get them to make decisions. I try not to give too much advice. That's a bad habit.
Yeah. Well, and for me, the question is, how can young people intentionally seek mentors, seek for mentors, right? Sometimes they might not have the arrangements to have a mentor, like Harvard Business School where they have a professor. Yeah. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to invite you to join the Observe Day newsletter. Every week, I send you highlights of upcoming observances, creative ways to celebrate, and behind the scenes extras from the shows. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and never miss a meaningful moment. Sign up today at observeday.com/join. That is observeday.com/join. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Well, unfortunately, you have to be a little bit pushy. If you find somebody you want as a mentor, you've got to say to the person, I really wish you would help me. I have a young lady, graduated from the business school. She came across me in my hometown, and she wrote me a letter and said, I really would like to talk to you regularly. I had a mentor, and mentor died. She said, I'd like to ask you to listen to my emails when they come in. And, I could have said, no, I'm too busy, but I said, she seemed like a nice lady.
Yeah.
And I said, fine. So she calls me and she said, I've just, I'm worried about my stock portfolio. What do you think? I've got this boyfriend who's not so, she talks about everything with me.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of her mentor, but if you want a mentor and you see the person you want to be mentored by, you just have to be a little bit pushy, maybe a little bit obnoxious. You got to sort of say, and then the person can always say no, and you can find someone else.
Yeah.
But mentors come and go too. You have mentors parts of your life where they're no longer effective. They no longer want to do it. That's possible, and you move on. But I would say having someone that's been there, done that. In other words, talking to someone who's had 3 children when you have your first child is a good idea. Talking to someone who's been a CEO, of a major broker. For example, they asked me to be the chairman of the board of trustees at the University of Rochester. So I said, okay, I'm not sure of that. I went back and I talked to 7 chairman of the board of schools in the area, Cornell, RPI. I got the past chairman, all these chairmen. I said, how is it? Well, the 6 out of 7 said, take the job. One guy said, you're crazy. Don't ever take the job. But, they described what the job would be, the difficulties of the job. And I sort of took that in and said, can I handle this? Is this something I want to do? Because I talked to people who essentially done it before me. And that was very important. So I find that to be mentors are extremely important. At the high school level, they've proven that. There's a professor at Harvard, his name is Fryer. He did this mentor test in Houston. He went out and basically put an ad in the newspaper, said, who wants to be a mentor? Got about 2,000 people in Houston who wanted to be mentors and assigned them to the lowest performing high schools. Within a relatively short period of time, 2 or 3 years, those high schools became better performing because the kids had somebody to talk to. And the
Yeah.
same thing, I'm involved in a group in Boston that provides mentors for students, for first gens. It's called Wiley, Willy. They have
Yeah.
10 mentors who take on between 8 and 10 kids in schools in the Boston area. So it's a very important. What you brought this up. It's vital, basically, to
Yeah.
be successful in life. And by the way, it's if you get lucky, get married to a mentor, and then you really have it at home.
What do you call it? That's a no-brainer.
That's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, well, it takes us to what you said at the beginning of the episode, which is you should know what you want, right? Because now you talk about seeking mentor. If you see someone you want to be a mentor, ask them. But in order for you to see someone you want to be a mentor, you have to know what you want and say, "Oh yeah, Ed, I really love what Ed is doing. That's the kind of thing I want to do. I should make him my mentor." But if I don't know what I want, I'm looking at Ed and I don't know that I'm seeing a potential mentor, and I'm like, I just let it slip by, right? Back to the starting point, we should know what we want so that we can always go for what we want, because we know that one thing I notice about education is many people associate education only with financial success, and they also what's the word now? When they think of education, they think of spending more money. Like, oh, in order to be educated, I need, or if I'm broke, I cannot be educated. Is that true?
If I'm broke, I can't what?
I cannot be educated.
Oh, no, you can. I mean, there's you have to go to a different level of education, or you have to put it off and work. When I was in the orphanage, most of the kids went to work for a couple of years before they went to school. I happened to get a scholarship. The other thing today, scholarships are, there's so many scholarships. I've had 2 or 300 scholarship students. I provide scholarships at 10 different universities, and I'm now a scholarship program at local community college here. First of all, that if you can get the financial resources, they're available today if you really try hard, or you may just have to work for a couple of years and put it off. I worked for 4 years before I went to business school because I had to save the money for business school. I mean, when I was a naval officer, they paid you $2,000 a year. So, so I worked as an engineer for a year, and because they had enough money to at least pay the tuition for the first year. So you
Yeah,
can get if you really want to get it. And of course, today, even farther down the line, there's enough online education, which is very cheap. That if you're good at it, it's hard because having your own educational processes is very difficult. But if you really want to do it, you'll go online, and it's all there.
yeah. From your own experience, what would you say are the non-financial returns education gave you? I mean, emotionally, mentally, morally, etc.
My education gave me a direction. First of all, I
Okay.
found out what it was to be an engineer. I became an engineer, and then I said, as I became an engineer, I found out that it interested me, and I liked it, but I seemed to like the business side of it a little bit more. So I started taking business courses. First in the Navy from the University of California, and then when got my job as an engineer, I went to Wharton School at night to see whether business was my interest. And the guy there said, night school is not for you. So I went full time. And as I got into business school, I found that was really something I really enjoyed, understanding businesses, how they worked, what went on inside a company, how you run a company. And I found that's what I really wanted to do. And I was going to actually, I wanted to manage a business, but I happened to come across a company called a mutual fund company. And they said, you won't run the business, but you go look at businesses. I figured that would be, and that would seem they were paying a lot of money for me to wander around and talk to people, which I couldn't believe. So I took the job, and I found out within 6 months I had fallen in love with getting on an airplane, flying and talking to a really bright CEO, coming
Yeah.
back and writing a 3-page, report on whether the stock should be purchased or not. I mean, relative to being an engineer, where I was in a laboratory with bubbling columns and people calling me and saying, "Follow, do this." I was a plastics engineer. It was crazy. It was unbelievable. I worked days and nights and so forth. This other business sounded ridiculously easy, and it was. And because one of the reasons it was easy is something that I really knew how to do and what kind of excited me. But education did that, and but you're able to put yourself into position as what. And I have this. My kids get a kick out of this to find out what you do Monday morning. There are a lot of descriptions of things like engineer. When I got in the Navy, I had 2 jobs. One was to be a plant manager, wear a big, suit with a plastic head on it and so
Yeah.
forth, or be this applications research engineer in a brand new product called plastics. In fact, they weren't called, polyethylene, polypropylene. I was in the plastics business 5 years before Dustin Hoffman, so, in the Graduate. And here I was developing a new product, and that was much more interesting to me than working in a plant, an old manufacturing plant, manufacturing some kind of plastic product. So, this is a very different business, but the same word. You're both an engineer.
Yeah.
That's what you said. Let's start back to what do you want to do? One of the things I'm doing, my crusade is to have freshmen in college or early on in their careers spend time thinking about what they want to do, forcing themselves, asking we said, what's your passion? Ask what your talents are, what your interests are, what your passion. Fight, get something you're interested in and try it. And if it's good, great, you're on your way. If it's not, you now have a very big plus. You don't want to do that anymore. You got other things. And I tested an awful lot. I tested physics. I tested what I call large scale projects. I hitchhiked my way up to the St. Lawrence Seaway. I got a job because I thought I'd love the idea of building a big dam or building a big electrical plant. And I loved the work. I was up there for quite a while, but I found out those people live in, trailers, and they live in it for 10 or 15 years while they build these things. And normally, you're in worse places than the St. Lawrence Seaway. You're in the jungle someplace or in the mountains someplace where you're kind of by yourself. So I liked the work, but I didn't like the general what you had to do as a person. I wanted to be an international businessman. And so I worked in Belgium as a chemical engineer in Belgian chemical plant. I was too early. 1964. Business was very small, very family oriented, and very complacent. You couldn't get them to move. So I was too early. Like, business was a bad place to be for 15 or 20 years until the 80s and 90s when things started to get better. So, but I tested it. And therefore, I kind of go back and forth, and you'll finally find something that really interests you. Or you find what I call the wind at your back. You find something that's really moving rapidly and you're in it. And when you find that, then things are really good.
Yeah. A question I had at the beginning of the episode, and I was like, while I was reading out the intro, I said I was going to, I must ask you this question. And that is, you supported education through philanthropy in a massive way. Why did education become the course you chose to invest in so deeply? I mean, there are other courses out there, but you chose education. Why?
Well, you see, the education, first of all, you learn something you can apply, and you do get an advantage over the next person. Going to business school, I learned techniques that other people didn't have, things that I could use to become effective as a manager. And that's worth a lot of money. Essentially, when I went out into the world, I had a capability. Also, you get a little moniker, he went to business school, and you get a little advantage that way. But more importantly, I learned things. I also, for 2 years, competed with very smart people all day long, talking in classroom. So I got confidence that I was reasonably good. I wasn't the bottom of the class. I was actually near the top of the class. And that was the first time that I ever got a chance to really focus on an education, because at college I worked all the time. Well, although I didn't have great grades, at the University of Rochester I had B minus, C plus. But at our business school, every day you sit in the classroom, you listen to 90 other people talk, you find out whether your ideas are as good as they are. And after 2 years, you feel pretty good if you've been okay during that period. Plus, you got friends for the rest of your life. I always tell people, get educated. Graduate school is a wonderful thing because you get a whole new body of friends which lasts your lifetime. And they can be more than friends. They can be mentors. They can be partners. I mean, one of my classmates, halfway through my business career, I needed a capability in the medical area. He ran a very small medical investment bank, so I brought him in. All of a sudden, now I had a whole leg and a whole other aspect to my company, and he's also was a friend of mine. So it worked out really well. If I hadn't gone to school, I wouldn't have known him.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I if the last question I want to ask you, and that is, I know you've addressed it in parts while you were responding to other questions, but for a young listener who feels their background has already limited their future, what would you want them to understand about time, learning, and possibility?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I believe today you have more opportunity than ever before. It's more complex, more difficult. There's more opportunity. I think just if you take my 3 mantras, as I call them, and as a young person, take anything is possible. Believe that. And I have to believe that. It doesn't come all at once. You can fail people fail all the time. I failed when in my 30s. Second thing is education is the solution to everything. So when you want to find your way in some, get the education to fit to whether it's online or going to Harvard Business School, get an education that satisfies the need of that particular direction. And the third one I want to pass on is never be a victim. See, one of the problems with life is you get to a certain point and something bad happens. And instead of, you take this huge energy in being a victim, spend time hating people, blaming yourself. Forget that. Take that energy and focus on what is going to be the title of my next book, What's Next?
Wow.
What's next is the most important 2 words in your life. Constantly focus on what's next, whether you're actually successful, but when you're unsuccessful and you have a problem and you either get fired or your boss doesn't like you or you get divorced or whatever it is, always focus on what's next. Take that energy that you would have focused on being a victim, hating yourself or hating someone else, and focus on what's next. Not easy either, but I've done that 2 or 3 times in my life, and I've been able to pivot. And I think these young people are going to have to pivot many times. I've been able to pivot very successful. In fact, one of my most difficult experiences was being basically kicked out of Lehman Brothers when I was a senior partner. And by focusing on what's next, I found my dream job, which was to be a managing partner of a small firm where I could put my passions to work, my principles to work, find my partners, and build my plans. And I spent 20 years having a ball, and we did very well. So so it's serendipity to some extent. But if I could have fought my boss because I was strong enough and I was important enough. I was chairman of outside boards, which I could have brought in. I could have gone to the press and so on, but I didn't. I focused on what's next. I found was really what I really wanted to do. So those are the 3 mantras that I put forth for people. Keep believing that anything's possible. I find if you look back in some of these autobiographies, people fool around until their 50s and then they find what they want to do and they become successful. Tiger Woods found it when he was 3 years old, but I always I think Giuseppe Verdi wrote his last symphony when he was 80. So, each person has trouble. And also it's context.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're born in depression, it's a lot more difficult than you're born in the 90s, So and also if you're born in America, if you're born in some other place, it's difficult. So there's a lot of factors in there, but those 3 mantras, in my mind, if you keep those going, especially don't be a victim, because we're in a difficult time and there are a lot of difficult experiences for people. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does help. Thank you so much for that advice. If
Yeah.
today's conversation moved you, Ed's full story is captured in his memoir, On the Road Less Traveled, An Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom. You can find it on Amazon. The link will be in the show notes. And you can also visit his website, edhajim.com. As we mark International Day of Education, may this episode remind us that learning isn't just about information, it's about liberation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's it for today's episode of the Observe Day podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life's special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.